So I want you to listen to one author's description of Noah's story. Water. All Noah can see is water. Evening sun sinks into it. Clouds are reflected in it. Boat is surrounded by it. Water. All Noah sees is water. He can't remember when he's seen anything but water. He and the boys had barely pushed the last hippo up the ramp when heaven opened 1,000 fire hydrants. Within moments, the boat was rocking, and for days the rain was pouring, and for weeks Noah has been wondering, how long is this going to last? For 40 days it rained, for months they floated, they ate the same food, smelled the same smell, looked at the same faces, and after a certain point, you run out of things to say to each other, right? Finally, the boat bumped, rocking stopped. Mrs. Noah gave Mr. Noah a look, and Noah gave the hatch a shove and poked his head through. The hull of the ark was resting on ground, but the ground was still surrounded by water. Noah, she said, what do you see? Water. He sent a raven on a scouting mission, never returned. Sent a dove, came back shivering and spent, having found no place to roost. So he tried again, pulled another dove from the bowels of the ark. The morning sun caused them both to squint, and as he kissed the breast of the bird, he felt a pounding heart. And had he put a hand to his chest, he would have felt another pounding heart. Because with the prayer, he let it go, and he watched until the bird was no longer bigger than a speck on a window. All day he looked for the dove's return. In between chores, he opened the hatch and searched. The sun warmed his face, but nothing lifted his heavy heart. He had seen nothing, not in the morning, not after lunch, not later. Now the sun's setting, sky is darkening. He's come to look one final time, but all he sees is water. You know that feeling, don't you? You know that feeling. You've stood where Noah stood, haven't you? You've known your share of floods. Flooded by the sorrow at the cemetery. Flooded by stress at the office, anger at the disability in your body, or at inability of your spouse to love you. You've seen that floodwater rise, right? And you've likely seen the sun set on your hopes. In other words, you've been in Noah's boat too, haven't you? And having been in that boat, as Noah was, we've all needed what Noah needed. We've needed some hope. And when we need some hope, we're not asking for a helicopter rescue, but the sound of one, that would be nice. In other words, hope doesn't promise an instant solution, but it does promise possibility of an eventual one. And sometimes, like Noah, all we need is a little hope. That's all Noah needed, and that's all he received. But before we talk about what he received, I just want us to stop here for a moment. And what I'd like you to do is just think of your life as an ark. And ask yourself, what conditions are you facing right now? Are you docked? Are you in a port feeling safe, secure, and full of hope? Are you drifting a little? Are you feeling the water level around you start to rise? Like Noah, are you riding out a massive flood with no dry ground and very little hope in sight? I'm just asking, what conditions are you facing right now? Because I believe this story is one that encourages us, causes us to ask ourselves questions like that. Anyway, back to Noah now. The world as he knew it, it's gone. And yet, his hope would not be destroyed. And so, he did. He sent out that raven. He sent out doves, and he did that to get a sense of when, not if, but when God would ease that flood. In other words, despite his circumstances, Noah had hope. And I'm sure Noah would have loved to see an acre of dry ground, a grove of grapes somewhere. And as he dreamed and as he hoped, there's Mrs. Noah, her voice reminding him dinner's on the table, he should just lock that hatch, come on back in. And he was just about to call it a day when he heard the cooing of a dove. And here's how the Bible describes that moment. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. An olive leaf. Now, I'm sure Noah would have been happy just to have that bird back, but to have that leaf, that bird brought more than a piece of tree. It brought hope. Hope is an olive leaf, evidence of dry land after a flood, proof to the dreamer that dreaming is worth the risk. That small leaf brought hope of a new world to come. Can you imagine? Can you imagine how Noah felt in that moment? And like Noah, don't we too love olive leaves in our lives? For example, one might hear these words said to them, "It appears the cancer might be in remission," or "I can help you with those finances," or "We'll get through this together." We love those olive leaves in life, don't we? But more than that, don't we love the doves that bring them? When the father walks his son through his first broken heart, he gives him an olive leaf. When the wife of many years consoles the wife of a few months, when she tells her that conflicts come and husbands are moody too, these storms pass. You know what she's doing, right? She's giving an olive leaf. Now, hope does not come easily. We know that. In Noah's story, we know that his first attempt left him disappointed when the raven didn't come back. But this story reminds us that setbacks and disappointments should not give us reason to stop hoping. The olive leaf did not mean that all problems were resolved, but it did give Noah and his family hope. Regardless of circumstances, there is always a thread of hope. I think that's the message that runs through this story of Noah. I think it runs through Scripture too. I mean, there's just this one verse, for example, that speaks to us. It's really an olive leaf that gives you and me hope, where it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." There's an olive leaf for you and me. Olive leaf symbolizes hope. And again, isn't it right to say that, like Noah, we like olive leaves because we need hope? And isn't it right to say, too, that we love those who give us hope? And I just say, isn't that why we love Jesus so much? Because who gives us hope more than he does? For example, Jesus stood near a woman who was yanked out of her bed of promiscuity. Police barged in. Her life was in danger, and then there she stood before a group of men in judgment, and she was waiting to be stoned to death for her behavior. In a difficult moment, we have this picture in our scripture today that Noah stood, and he could see nothing but water. And in this story, this woman stood, and she saw nothing but anger. She had no hope. But then Jesus spoke. If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." And in that moment, there was silence. Silence. Both the eyes and the rocks of the accusers hit the ground, and within moments they left, and Jesus was alone with that woman. The dove of heaven had offered her an olive leaf. "Woman, where are they? Who has condemned you?" "No one," she said. "Then neither do I," Jesus said. "Go now, leave your life of sin," and into her shame-filled world, he brought her a leaf of hope. Jesus also took a leaf of hope to Martha. She was in the sea of sorrow. Her brother had died, his body had been buried, and Jesus was late. And if you had been there, she said to Jesus, "my brother would not have died." But moments later, Jesus brought her brother back to life. Even at the time of death, Jesus offers life. He gives us hope. "I'm the resurrection and the life. Who believes in me will live. Even though he dies, whoever lives and believes in me will never die." Do you believe this? And Martha said, "I believe. You're the Son of God who's come into the world." Jesus offered that one woman grace, resurrection. To Martha, to you and me, a leaf of grace, a leaf of life, forgiveness of sin, defeat of death. That's the hope he gives. In his book, The Grand Essentials, Ben Patterson tells of a submarine that sank, and the entire crew was trapped. And every effort was made to rescue the sailors, but every effort failed. And near the end of the ordeal, a deep sea diver heard tapping on the steel wall of the sunken sub. And he placed his helmet against the vessel, and he realized that he was hearing a sailor tap out a question in Morse code. Is there any hope? To the guilty who asked that question, is there any hope? Jesus says yes. To the dying who asked that question, Jesus says yes. To all the Noahs of the world, to all who search the horizon for a fleck of hope, he says yes. Like the dove that came to Noah, Jesus comes to us with the leaf of hope. Is there hope? I wonder if people ask that. And if the answer is yes, then we need to ask ourselves, do we receive it? Like Noah, do we take that olive leaf? And do we receive the hope God gives? I hope we do, because we need it. Others do too. And tell me, what do you suppose Noah did with that fig leaf? Did he throw it overboard and just forget about it? Do you suppose he stuck it in his pocket and saved it for a scrapbook? Or do you think he cried out in joy and assembled the troops and passed it around like the diamond of hope that it was? Certainly he told others. But that's what you do with hope. You pass it around. You don't stick it in your pocket. You give it to others, to the ones you love. So let me ask you just another question. Like Noah, are you a flood survivor? By God's grace, have you found your way to dry land at certain times in your life? Have waters subsided? And have you passed through a flood and lived to tell about it? In other words, are you not qualified to give hope to someone else? Batul, you did today. Right now, it feels so right that you spoke today. Think of floods in your past. How about adolescence? Remember the turbulence of the teenage years? For me, those were tough times. But I got through them. And is that not what teenagers today need to hear? Do they not need an olive leaf from a survivor? And what about young couples? It happens in every marriage, doesn't it? The honeymoon ends, and the river of romance becomes the river of reality. And they wonder if they'll survive. And you can tell them they will because you've been through it. And are you a cancer survivor? Someone in the cancer ward needs to hear from you. Have you buried a spouse and lived to smile again? Then find the recently widowed and walk with them. When we stop and think about it, we all have an opportunity, but maybe it's more of an obligation to give someone else hope. Each of us has a story of hope to tell. And we might not recognize how powerful our story is until we see it resonate in someone else's life. But you know Noah's story? It still resonates thousands of years later. And God uses that story to give people hope today. So I'm going to ask right now that some folks just pass some baskets around to each of the pews. And as it comes along, you'll find an artificial olive leaf in it. And I just ask that you take one. And as you take one, I just want you to think more about the olive leaf in today's story. And what is it really saying to you? Keeping in mind that the olive leaf is a symbol of hope. And I want you to ask yourself questions like these. Have I received the hope God has given me in Jesus Christ? Have I shared hope with others? And who might I give an olive leaf to today?